This is section 10.4, surface area of prisms and cylinders. And as you can see, these are the objectives. Learn and apply the formula for the surface area of a prism. Learn and apply the formula for the surface area of a cylinder. Not only you need to apply the formula, but also learn where it comes from. Vocabulary, I'll read them to you. Lateral phase, lateral edge, right prism, oblique prism. Actually, I'm going to stop, but I'm sure you can follow along. I'm just trying to point out there's quite a few terms that you need to know from this section. Let's move on to the next slide. Follow along. It says lateral faces and bases. Let me clarify this with the following picture. Let's look at the lateral faces. Notice that there's three faces that are lateral. So those are the lateral faces. The front, if you remember the orthographic drawing from the previous section, you're looking at it from the front. That's one of the lateral faces. From this side, from the left side, that's another lateral face, and from the right side. Now the bases are looking at this figure from the top and bottom. And will you be able to tell me the perimeter of the base? And it's actually pretty simple. The perimeter of this base, you know that this represents a base. So the perimeter will be just walking around from there to there, continue walking, which is basically along the perimeter of that triangle. You're going to need to know that information in this section. Computing perimeter of bases. Let's move on to the next slide. Follow along. Says the altitude of a prism or cylinder is perpendicular. Notice it's 90 degrees. Perpendicular segment joining the planes of the bases. So these are the planes. This is the plane that are basically on top of the bases. So the distance from here to here is what we call the altitude. Follow along. Says the height of a three-dimensional figure is the length of an altitude. So in other words, height and altitude are basically the same thing. Lateral area and area bases. So now we're looking at area on this slide. So let's look at this shape. What is the lateral area in this shape? The lateral area is basically that portion of the, let me get a pen, this portion of the figure. Where does this come from? From the lateral faces. And what about the area of the bases? These are the bases. So that's why these are the area of the bases. And let me erase this here. And notice that the perimeter of this, let me get a pen. The perimeter of this figure is the distance around this triangle, which is A plus B plus C, which is my P, my perimeter. I'm going to be using that to compute surface area in some of these shapes. Let's move on to the next slide. This is a formula. It says lateral area and surface area of right prisms. Follow along. It says the lateral area of a right prism with the base perimeter P and height L is P times H. So the lateral area of this shape, which basically is going around here, these lateral faces, is whatever the perimeter is times the height. That's just the lateral area. Now, the surface area, which is basically all the faces of the right prism with the lateral area L, which you already know from here, and base B, which you know that the area of the base is whatever this is equal to, S is equal to the lateral plus two bases, or whatever the area of the base is. Why two? Because you have a bottom base and a top base. Or you can look at it like this. Instead of L, you can use pH, because that's how you compute the lateral area, plus 2b, which these two formulas are basically the same thing. And the surface area of a cube with edge length S is 6x squared. If you use this formula, you're able to get this formula, okay? Or you might already know this from a previous course. If you don't, I can show you in class. Just talk to me, and it's actually pretty easy. Just don't have enough time here. But talk to me, and I'll be more happy to show you. Let's move on to the next slide. Practice. Here you go. Find the lateral area and surface area of the right rectangular prism. Round to the nearest tenth if necessary. In this case, we're not going to have to round to the nearest tenth. So here we go. I'm just going to look at this three-dimensional figure as a net. Okay. So notice that these are this is my lateral faces. It's right. Once I create the net, they are here. And these are my bases. So if I want to compute the surface area of this shape, the lateral is the perimeter, which is basically going around here, the base, times the height. The perimeter is 24, and the height is 3. It gives me 72 square feet. And then I need to compute the area of the bases, which is one base, and then multiply times 2, and that's going to give me my S, or surface area. That's what you see here. This is my lateral, 2 times 35. Why 35? Because 5 times 7 is 35. And then once I add these two numbers, this is my final answer, to number 1. So the surface area of this right rectangular prism is 142 square feet. Let's move on to the next slide. Here's number 2, same directions as the previous problem. And again, on this problem, we're not going to have to do any rounding. Problem number 2, I'm not going to generate the net, but you should be able to follow along. So what you want to do is first find the lateral. Once you find the lateral, you're going to have to use PH, which is the perimeter of this shape, this rectangle, times the height, which is 14. The perimeter of this rectangle is 32, the height is 14, so that's why the lateral is 448. At this point, now you can basically find the area of the two bases and add that to the lateral. So PH plus 2B, we know what PH is, which is 448. Why do I have 7 times 9? Because those are the dimensions of one of the bases, and I multiply that by 2 because we have two bases. Once you add these two numbers, this is the final answer to number 2, 574 square feet. Let's look at this slide, lateral surface and bases of cylinders. We're going to be looking at this picture. Let's look at the lateral surface of this picture. Let me get a pen. The lateral surface is kind of hard because you don't have faces. The lateral surface is basically going around this cylinder. Okay. Now the bases are basically the circle on the top and circle on the bottom. This is a very important part of this picture that you're going to be using on the next slide. If I ask you to give me the distance around this blue region, you should be able to tell me that that is equal to the circumference of the circle, which will be 2 pi r. Now let's use this information on the next slide. Now you're going to have to know where this formula comes from because you're not going to be able to use a flashcard on the test. So here we go. The lateral area of a right cylinder with radius r and height h is L equals 2 pi r. So the lateral area is what we went over in the previous slide, just going around the cylinder. And notice if you were to create a net out of this cylinder, this is what you get. Now notice that this is a rectangle. This is the height. What does this distance represent? It represents the circumference of the circle, which is equal to 2 pi r. So that's why the lateral is base, which is 2 pi r, which you see here, times the height. Now the surface area of this right cylinder with lateral L and base area B is equal to, again, S is for surface area, equals lateral plus two bases. And you know that the base of this figure is the circle. That's why you should be able to follow along what we have here. This is just the lateral, 2 pi rh, 2 times the area of one of the circles. And this is how we come up with the surface area of a right cylinder. Let's apply this on the next slide. Oh, before I forget, just read this. Make sure you understand that. Let's move on to the next slide. 3 says find the lateral area and surface area of the right cylinder. Give your answers in terms of pi. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a net. This is the net you should be able to draw. And notice that the distance from here to here is 8. Now this is 10, which means that this is 10. What is this going to represent? Basically the circumference of this circle with radius 8. So again, let's highlight the radius. Radius 8 inches. So let's find the lateral first. So lateral from the previous formula is, previous slide, excuse me, 2 pi r(h). So all I know is that the radius is 8, the height is 10. I'm going to substitute that. And then I'm going to simplify this, leave it in terms of pi. And this is the lateral, 160 pi square inches. And then now to find the actual surface area, I'm just going to add the lateral plus 2 bases. And you should follow that this is equal to 288 pi square inches. And this is actually the conclusion of part 1, section 10.4.